Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Whitney Van Laningham, and Season 6 of Rick and Morty has finally come to a close with their latest Christmas special. We've got some major speculating about Season 7 to do, but today I'm taking you frame by frame through Season 6, Episode 10 of Rick and Morty, and breaking down all the details you might have missed. Let's start with the episode title. Rictional Rick Poon's Rick Miss Mortcation is a play on National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, a late 80s holiday comedy starring Chevy Chase. It's no secret that Dan Harmon and Chevy Chase had a falling out on the set of Community, so I guess that this is an example of this series putting aside any grudges to honor a Christmas classic. We open on the Rick and Morty logo decked out in Christmas lights before being taken to the snowy driveway of the Smith-Sanchez home, where Space Beth's ship is parked next to Rick's. When we first see the fam gathered at the foot of the Christmas tree, peep Jerry's sweater. That reindeer looks like the festive version of the deer that Beth had to save in Season 2's A Wrinkle in Time. Rick shoots a portal on the floor and drops straight down through it, foreshadowing the other vertical accidents to come this episode. He reemerges as Rick Sanchez, bearing gifts from across the multiverse, including an extra-dimensional extended edition of Miracle on 34th Street. When Jerry puts it on for the fam later, we can see that it's the original black and white 1947 version of this movie, not the 1994 John Hughes reboot starring Mara Wilson. Love that Jerry still has a VHS player, especially when Rick's interdimensional cable box crystal is sitting in plain view. For Beth, Rick travels to a dimension where she wasn't murdered as a child and he wasn't an absentee father to obtain childhood photos of the two of them together. When Space Beth opens her copy, it's an image of Beth riding on her dad's shoulders, sharing a mint ice cream cone with him. As we learned in both the Rick Shank Redemption and Rick Mirai Jack, Rick's original Beth was killed by Rick Prime, and Morty's real grandpa is the true Rickest Rick. Our Rick's Beth also happened to be killed as the family was preparing to go out for ice cream, which makes this photograph all the more bittersweet. Summer gets what looks like $500 sent to her Venmo account. Today's video is sponsored by Babbel, one of the top language learning apps in the world. I'm going home for the holidays, and one of my best friends from childhood's grandmother is the world's greatest cook, but she speaks zero English. I always feel bad not being able to give her a compliment beyond a clean plate and a thumbs up, but with Babbel, I can change that. Babbel specializes in preparing you for real-life encounters and situations. Studies have shown that 15 hours of using Babbel is the equivalent of a semester of college of Spanish, and 15 hours in Babbel flies by. I can watch videos, listen to podcasts, play games, or do lessons. Whatever kind of learning mood I'm in, Babbel's got something that fits the bill. I like how they gamify learning. I have daily goals and achievements that I can unlock as I learn the language. I'm pretty early in my Babbel journey, but I have started to learn some useful phrases like Lo único que disfruto más que tu paella es tu campaña. Por favor, adápteme. Get up to 60% off your subscription when you click the link in the description or scan the QR to start learning with Babbel today. Morty gets the real prize, a real-life blue lightsaber just like Luke Skywalker's from A New Hope. Before he hands it to him, Rick says,
"Morty, you asked for this a long time ago, and I finally went far away enough to get it."
Paying homage to the opening scroll of Star Wars. The two race to the garage to play Jedi, where it turns out that Rick has set up a whole fruit cart for Morty to slice and dice at, a reference to the game Fruit Ninja. Rick instructs Morty to strike him down, insisting that he'll just become a pile of clothes like that old guy. When Obi-Wan fights Vader for the last time at the end of A New Hope, he tells Darth that if he strikes him down, he shall become more powerful than he could possibly imagine. Moments later, Vader gets him with the lightsaber, and Ben Kenobi disappears, leaving only his Jedi robes behind. When Rick hits the lightsaber and vanishes, Morty asks him if he's T-shirt Rick now, calling back to his grandpa's previous forms like Tiny Rick, Pickle Rick, and you get the idea. Unfortunately, less than 10 minutes after getting the coolest Christmas gift of all time, Morty drops the lightsaber perfectly vertically, and it begins sinking through the ground, reminding me of this bit from Robot Chicken where Anakin drops his lightsaber through the floor, maiming those below. Ironically, Ben Kenobi tells Luke in A New Hope that lightsabers aren't as random or clumsy as blasters, but that's clearly not always the case. To catch it before it causes more damage, Rick and Morty race through the underground levels of Rick's lab. Level 1 has weapons and generation chambers, Level 2 is full of alien plants, one of which we saw previously in Season 5's Thanksploitation Spectacular, and Level 3 features several creatures in a red liquid-type cryosleep, first seen in Season 4's The Old Man in the Seat. They even find a cool-ass sushi restaurant on level 15. But the good shit is what's happening on level 10, where Morty finds the real Rick tinkering away. Remember last episode when Morty asked Rick if he was a robot and Rick replied that there were already enough clones and robots in the family? Yeah, he lied. Because he's a goddamn dirty robot who will die if he tells the truth. Remember that throwaway joke about the lightsaber's postage pricing from the opening? It turns out that it was a hint that Robot Rick can't solve the "Are you a robot" captchas without going against his programming. Rick Rick decided to build a robot that would be 22% nicer to his grandson after Morty called him boring in a Rick and King Mortar's Mort. We've been with Robot Rick since he rescued Morty from the sun. Robot Rick even tried to subtly tell Morty that there was a robot hiding amongst the family. God damn it, Rick, I trusted you and I was brainstorming on how Summer could be introduced as the robot, and you made me look like a ding-dang fool. Now I know how Morty feels. I thought that therapy was helping, especially because he made so much progress this season towards bonding with his family and letting go of unimportant battles. But nah, that lasted about 8.2 episodes before Rick got butthurt and decided to give his life some purpose. This is just another Crow God thing, where Rick can't handle it when Morty is disillusioned by him. Instead of looking within himself and doing the work like Dr. Wang suggested, he just throws himself into his latest hyperfixation so that he doesn't have to actually change or feel anything. And listen, dude, I get it, your neighbor Gene is annoying and most David Arquette roles are boring, but don't you dare disrespect the Scream franchise or Officer Dewey in this household. If you want to take it out on Netflix dramas that aren't accidentally good, that's fine. I wasted 7 hours of my life on The Watcher too, so I get it. This isn't a complete reversion of Rick's season 9 character growth, however. Rick's actions as Pissmaster were the real deal, and through that adventure, Rick realized that being obsessed with a nemesis will destroy you and your family. This is why Rick replaced himself with a kinder Rick, so that the family could have the grandfather they deserve, while he finds Rick primed to get closure on his family's death so that he can move on. In the background, we see what Rick is working on to help him catch Prime. See those robot parts in that chamber? That's one of the killbots that attacked Rick and Morty in the first episode of season 6, Solarix. Towards the end of the episode, we see it up close as Rick blasts through its pieces to find a thumb drive that he believes will lead him to Rick Prime. We also see Rick studying Prime's hologram butt, comparing it to other Rick butts throughout the multiverse. Prime's butt identification number is 34CWRP195, and I got really excited because I was like, 34C, that's my bra size! I didn't know we were using the titty system to measure butts now. I'm gonna talk more about Rick's manhunt later on in the video, so hang tight. Outside, the presidential Blackhawk touches down on the Smiths' front lawn, and the president explains to Morty that the lightsaber he dropped is a mile deep and still falling. Soon, it will reach the Earth's core, causing a chain reaction that'll destroy the planet. It's a bit like firing a proton torpedo down a hatch in the Death Star, if you think about it. When the president mentions the lightsaber's hilt, his security detail yells out that they're powered by kyber crystals. That guy is definitely subbed to new Rockstars and knows his Star Wars lore. After delivering an impassioned Gen X speech about why Star Wars sucks, the president sets up a team of scientists and military personnel to help intercept the lightsaber. The portal used by these government agents was first seen in season 3's The Rick, Carrion, Morty date, and according to their countdown clock, they have roughly an hour 20 to catch it before it hits the core. Although Rick warns the scientists not to touch his shit or it'll kill them, this dude boops one of his devices and disintegrates. He tells the president that if he wanted the government in his house, he'd just buy an Alexa, because we all know that Jeff Bezos sees you when you're sleeping and knows when you're awake. The president retorts by telling Rick that he looks like Phil Spector wiped his ass with Randy Quaid, referencing two inarguably unattractive Hollywood criminals, the latter of which also starred in Christmas Vacation alongside Chevy Chase as Cousin Eddie. It turns out that Rick has a lightsaber of his own, a Sith Vertisaber whose prime directive is to always remain vertical. Unfortunately, the lightsaber rebels, turns off its brain, and tunnels to Italy, where it slices through a crowd of folks just trying to enjoy the Venice canals. When the president sees the carnage, he says, "That is definitely not amore," referencing Dean Martin's That's Amore, amore translating to mean love in Italian. President Curtis also pulls a classic US government move and blames the carnage on the Saudi Arabian royals. Although they managed to get the subterranean drill, like a submarine but for Earth, working, Rick storms off instead of hopping into the cockpit because he's still super angry at Morty for calling him boring. This machine's design is kind of like a mix between the drill from 1976's At the Earth's Core mixed with a lightsaber, and their race to the Earth center itself is a reference to disaster movies like 2000's Deep Core or 2003's Core, which I totally thought was the same movie until today. This week's Inside the Episode talks about the scenario being like a Michael Bay movie, referencing the inspiration this plot takes from 1998's Armageddon. Despite the president's valiant attempt, Morty's the one who spectacularly catches the rogue lightsaber, and he proudly proclaims, "May the Force be with me!" to the crowd of waiting scientists and military personnel. His victory is short-lived, however, as the president steals this elegant weapon from a more civilized age. When Morty accuses him of not even liking Star Wars because of his whiny-ass speech earlier, the president replies that Star Wars belongs to him because he was around Morty's age when the original trilogy premiered in the late 70s and early 80s. But after the third movie got all muppety, something in in him began to rot, and he openly blames George Lucas and Disney for his rage. He even mocks Lucas for his gout, which, Jesus Christ, is not cool, man. He's clearly gatekeeping the fandom, and despite having access to his own source of lightsabers, he simply doesn't want to let Morty enjoy it. If you're confused about why Gen X and the President are so mad at Star Wars, I highly recommend that you check out Barney Stinson's explanation of the Ewok line theory. It states that Star Wars fans are divided into two groups: those born before May 25th, 1973, and those born after. Anyone to the left of the Ewok line, born between 1960 and 1973, was at least 10 years old when Return of the Jedi hit theaters on May 25th, 1983. Because of this, they were too old to be swayed by the adorableness of the Ewoks, and left to bitch about how unrealistically the OG trilogy ended. As the President was roughly 14 when these movies came out, he was likely 20 when he finally saw Return. Those born to the right of the Ewok line, however, likely saw it as young children, and are therefore okay with the Ewoks' presence in Star Wars. With an empty bowl on his head, the President pretends to be Luke Skywalker, deepening his connection with the Force by wearing a helmet with a blast shield. Like a dumbass, he also drops the lightsaber vertically through to the core of the Earth, and I think we all understand now why becoming a Jedi takes years and years of training. But back at the Smith-Sanchez home, Morty reveals to his family that the Rick they've been spending Christmas with was a robot the whole time. Even after playing Am I a Robot with him, Beth, Space Beth, Jerry, and Summer simply believed that Grandpa was finally leaning into the holiday spirit to teach them valuable lessons about vulnerability and family fun. As soon as they realize that this is Robot Rick, the Smiths attack him. Jerry cuts open his arm with a turkey carver, Space Beth shoots him with her blaster, Beth slices his arm off with a broken wine bottle, and Summer stabs his eye out with a fork. Afterwards, they decorate their Christmas tree with the robot's body parts, only to realize that the President and Morty might need his help again. After rebooting Robot Rick with a battery pack and Christmas string lights, and rebuilding his body with some C-3PO-looking parts, he and Morty head to the White House, which the President has blasted into space in order to avoid Earth's impending explosion. Inside, they find probably the coolest hidden secret kept by any US president: an entire room dedicated to Star Wars built by President Carter. Not only is there a replica of the Mos Eisley Cantina complete with working kegs, courtesy of George W., there's also a giant recreation of the window from the Death Star. It's got several droids and other machinery too. That guy right there looks like it could either be an AT-XT or an AT-ST. And the President deploys an army of lightsaber-armed pit droids in the same way the battle droids in Attack of the Clone are unleashed. The lightsaber-eyed robot also reminds me a little of KS-20 from Rogue One, and we've got a TIE Fighter and a TIE Fighter Advance stored in the rafters. My two favorite parts of this room, however, are the mini model of the Death Star's trenches and Vice President Dwayne from Season 5's Thanksgiving episode, frozen in carbonite like Han Solo. Morty nearly gains the upper hand, but unfortunately for him, Robot Rick jumps in front of the mini lightsabers headed straight for the President. Their vertical fall cuts a hole in the bottom of the White House, and he, Morty, and Robot Rick are nearly sucked into the vacuum of space. Luckily, Rick portals them safely back to the garage. Well, not totally safely. Robot Rick is still dying. Interestingly, we see red and blue wires hanging out of his right eye, exactly like when evil Morty removed his eye patch at the end of Season 1's Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind. Before he passes on to the World Wide Web in the sky, Robot Rick tells Morty that because Rick literally built him to make his grandson happy, there was still a true part of the real Rick that wanted to show more support towards his grandson. He also encourages his human counterpart to do a little more for Morty on his own, without the aid of technology or distractions. Rick decides to take this robot variant's advice, and invites Morty to join him on level 10 to look over his progress in finding Rick Prime. Along with his specific butt number and hologram, we see the map of hundreds of red dots for a second time, and Rick explains that those aren't just the places his nemesis could be, they're the places he is. This word choice makes me think that each dot is a killbot zone, where Prime has set up traps all across the multiverse. Or the Rickus Rick has somehow managed to divide his consciousness amongst different hosts in various dimensions, kinda like the intergalactic version of Horcruxes. They could also simply be decoys. We know that even decoy Ricks love to make decoys from Season 5's Mortiplicity, so I wouldn't put it past Prime to place watered-down versions of himself in different locations to force Rick to kill hundreds of him before finding the real him. In the same way that he gave Rick a 50-50 shot at catching him in Solarix, he could escalate, forcing Rick to search for him like a needle in a haystack. Rick offers to let Morty help him hunt down Rick Prime. In place of his previous 100 years Rick and Morty speech, He repeats the phrase, "You and me, Morty," in regards to finding and killing Prime as grandfather and grandson. You can even see the alcohol dribbling out of his mouth when he loses his shit, despite his mouth being clean for the majority of the season. Of course, he specifies that Season 7 won't entirely focus on this storyline. It'll just be a couple of episodes sprinkled in, kinda like they did with Evil Morty before him. Although, it does kind of break my heart that he's diving back into his obsession with finding his original wife and daughter's killer. He made so much progress in Solarix, even telling Diane's voice that he had to move on from her haunting him to remain in the moment with his new family. But obviously, that episode was Chekhov's variant. And of course, we need closure on Rick Prime as much as our Rick does. During the credits, we pull out to find Mr. Poopybutthole watching the episode on Hulu while he's getting yoked at the gym. If you zoom in, the video player tauntingly begs for its viewers to rewatch its content, self-aware of how frivolous television is and how media corporations design their web players to loop us into giving them more watch time. Mr. Poopybutthole has a habit of showing up in post-credits scenes, and this season's post-credits mirrors Season 5's, where Mr. PBH was watching Evil Morty's grand plan unfold. In that scene, we learn that he never got his life back together after sending his students to the hospital in Season 4's One Crew Over the Cuckoo's Morty, and that his wife Amy left him. There's a fan theory that Mr. Poopybutthole become a self-insert for showrunner Dan Harmon, and that his divorce was inspired by Harmon's 2015 divorce. And there does seem to be some merit for that theory here, as Mr. Poopybutthole personal trainer looks like Dave Klein, Harmon's personal trainer. But pain isn't just mental in this CrossFit-inspired dungeon of pain. Poopybutthole tries to bench 90 pounds and breaks a leg in the process, crying out for Amy. If this self-insert theory is true, don't expect Amy and Poopy to reconnect though. Instead, expect him to find himself and settle down with the writer of a criminally underrated gem on interdimensional Quibi. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter at WhitneyPuppy, follow New Rockstars, subscribe to New Rockstars for more analysis of everything you love, and thanks for watching. Bye!